She used to hold my hand like she was afraid the wind might carry me away, fingers wrapped around mine, firm, small, warm. She wouldn't let go, even in sleep. I remember the way she'd burrow her cheek into my shoulder, her breath soft and steady against my skin, like a little clock that only ticked when I was near. Back then, it felt like love so deep it would never unravel. Now, she won't answer my letters, they come back unopened. Or worse, they don't come back at all, just disappear into the hush like a scream swallowed by fog. And still, I write, every month, like clockwork, her name in the same old cursive. I taught her myself, back when crayons were still her weapons of choice, and the biggest betrayal in her world was when I hid the sweet jar. I know what you're thinking. She's busy, she has her own life now. Or, the cruelest one, maybe you did something, Grandma, and that's fair. We all do things, don't we? We raise our voices, we hold too tight, we let go too soon, but love, real, aching, bone-deep love, doesn't just disappear, not without a word, not without at least one goodbye. That's why I'm telling this story, not because I want your pity, my dears. No, I've had enough of that, enough of those well-meaning glances from nurses and neighbors, that quiet tilt of the head that says, poor thing, she's been forgotten. I haven't been forgotten. I remember myself just fine. It's her who seems to have let go, but before she slipped through my fingers, she was mine, my daughter, my shadow, my miracle, and the day she stopped calling me Mama, well, I reckon I stopped breathing properly after that, you see. I come from a time when stories like this were whispered, if they were told at all. A time when mothers carried the world in their aprons and pain in their silence. We didn't talk about disappointment. We swallowed it, we cooked dinner with it, we smiled through it, for the sake of the children we loved so fiercely. But I'm too old now for swallowing things down, and if I don't tell this story, no one else will. So, here I sit, just me and the tick of the old mantel clock, the scent of tea that's gone lukewarm, and the ache of memories that won't stay put. I want to tell you everything from the beginning, before the letters stopped coming, before the holding hands turned into crossed arms. Before the silence set in like winter frost. I'll tell you what I know, and what I never understood. I'll show you the thread that ran from her tiny fingers to my calloused ones, and where, somewhere along the line, it frayed. You'll see joy, too. Don't worry, I wasn't always sad. There were peaches in summer, and laughter on porch swings. There were lullabies hummed into sleep and shoes lined neatly by the door. There was pride, so much pride, and then, there was fear, the slow kind. The kind that tiptoes in when you aren't looking, and takes root in the quiet corners. But we'll get to all that, first. Let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much, that even their silence sounded familiar? If so, then this story is yours too. Before we begin, my sweethearts, do me a kindness, like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and leave me a little comment, telling me where you're listening from. Maybe your story's different, maybe it isn't, but I believe, with all that's left in me, that some stories deserve to be spoken, even when they still hurt. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. A little town, a crooked smile, and the first time I heard her heartbeat echo inside my own. I was born in the spring of 1939, just a few weeks before the war began, but out where we lived, in that quiet stretch of Kansas farmland, it was hard to imagine the world burning. We had dust storms more often than we had news. And by the time a headline reached our front porch, it was already a ghost. My world back then was no bigger than a dirt road, 2 acres of wheat, and the white steeple of Mount Zion Baptist ringing its bell every Sunday morning. My mama, God rest her soul, used to sing as she boiled laundry in the big copper pot out back. Swing low, sweet chariot, mostly, or sometimes that old hymn, leaning on the everlasting arms. Her voice wasn't what you'd call pretty, but it was honest, cracked in places from years of wind and worry. She always smelled like lye soap and lavender water, her apron stained with flour and tobacco dust. My daddy chewed Red Man from the time he was 15 and had a cough like gravel dragging across wood, but he was kind in his own quiet way. He built our home board by board, and when Mama would snap at me not to slam the screen door, he'd wink and say, "Let her run, Ruth, let her be loud, it means she's alive." We didn't have much money, but we didn't know any different. My brothers and I wore hand-me-downs until the elbows gave out, and our Christmases were more orange slices than presents. But my goodness, the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg in that tiny kitchen. It made the whole world feel holy. Mama baked from memory, never used a recipe. Her cornbread was yellow as the morning sun, and her apple pie could calm a fever. I spent my girlhood barefoot, knees skinned, hair in messy braids, always dragging a stick through the dirt like it was a wand. Our nearest neighbor was half a mile off, so my imaginary friends worked overtime. But I didn't mind the quiet. The wind through the wheat sang lullabies, and the barn cats followed me like shadows. The world was smaller then, but it felt safe, predictable. On Saturdays, we went into town, which meant a 2-hour ride in the back of Daddy's truck, sitting on grain sacks and singing You Are My Sunshine with my brothers. Town meant the mercantile, penny candies, and the sound of a needle dropping onto a spinning vinyl at Mr. Crane's record shop. I remember the first time I heard Billie Holiday's voice. I stood frozen by the speaker, the sound of her pain spilling like molasses, thick, slow, and unshakable. That was the year I turned 12. I started noticing things around that time, how Mama would pause when she looked at me sometimes, like she was seeing a shadow that hadn't been there before. How the boys at church began to call me pretty instead of pesky. I didn't understand what that meant yet. Not really, but something had shifted. I wasn't just a child, running wild in the fields anymore. I was becoming something else, someone else. The first job I ever had was at the corner diner, Miss Bell's place. I was 14, wore white shoes and a pink apron, and worked Saturdays serving up root beer floats and grilled cheese. Miss Bell was a widow with soft hands and a sharper tongue. She told me once, "The world's full of men who'll smile at you with a lie in their back pocket. Learn the difference between charm and character." Darling, I didn't know then how badly I'd need to remember that. Still, I loved the work, the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the jukebox playing Hank Williams, the ring of the cash register. All of it made me feel like I belonged somewhere. I had purpose, pride, a little envelope of cash every week, wrapped in wax paper and tied with string. I saved every penny in a mason jar under my bed and dreamed of someday seeing a real city, Tulsa, maybe even Chicago. But my life, my real joy, was always the family. Sunday dinners were sacred. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans cooked soft in ham hock, and biscuits that steamed when you broke them open. We'd bow our heads, hold hands, and Daddy would pray with a voice so low it seemed to come up from the floorboards. After the meal, we'd sit on the porch swing, watching the sky change colors. The crickets would start singing, and the stars would blink on one by one. That porch, that quiet, it held us all together. Back then, I believed love was simple. If you gave it, it would come back to you. I carried that belief like a locket around my neck at 17. I met a boy named Paul at the Harvest Festival. He was a year older, lanky, with sleepy eyes, and a crooked smile that made me feel like I was the only girl in the world. He asked me to dance beneath the string lights, and I remember how his hand trembled just a little when it touched my waist. We didn't say much that night, just swayed to the music, hearts beating like drumsticks on a table. That was the start of everything, or so I thought. But don't get ahead of me. Now, that part of the story comes later. At that point, I was still a girl with skinned knees and big dreams, still someone who thought heartbreak was just something you read about in the backs of magazines. I still believed I could hold on to everything that mattered if I just tried hard enough. And above all, I believed family meant forever, that no matter what happened, no matter how the world shifted, the people you love would stay beside you, that a mother's hand was the safest place in the world, and that if you gave everything you had to your children, they'd never forget where they came from. But life doesn't always reward devotion the way you think it will. That's what I want to tell you, my sweethearts. That's what I didn't understand until much, much later. But for now, let me linger here just a moment longer. Let me remember the squeak of that porch swing, the smell of Mama's biscuits rising in the oven, the sound of my daddy whistling Amazing Grace through the morning fog. Because once the world begins to change, you never get back to that kind of peace. Sometimes now, in the quiet hours before the nurses bring my breakfast, I close my eyes and try to climb back into those days. I can still feel the cool planks of the front porch under my bare feet, still smell the coal smoke from the neighbor's chimney drifting across our fields. I can almost hear my brother James laughing as he chased me with a frog cupped in his hands, while Mama shouted from the garden not to ruin her tomatoes. We were wild and soft all at once. We knew the names of every bird and weed and storm cloud. We thought the world was something we'd always have under our feet. Back then, childhood didn't end with a celebration. There were no graduation parties or milestone photos. You just worked a little more each season, took on a few heavier chores, started sleeping less and worrying more. But somewhere in the middle of it, a girl becomes a woman, and no one ever warns you it's happening. The first time I bled, Mama handed me a worn-out towel and said, "Don't let the boys see you cry." That was it. That was the whole ceremony. No softness, no explanations, just the unspoken understanding that womanhood came with a kind of loneliness men would never feel. Still, I found my ways of holding on to the light. I'd sneak out to the barn after chores, lie in the hayloft with a book I wasn't supposed to be reading, Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre, and dream of places where women's hearts got to be loud, where love wasn't a burden but a song. The kind of love that didn't end in silence, but life had its own script for me. By 18, I was engaged. By 19, I was married. And by 21, well, we'll get to that. For now, just know this, I still thought the world was good. I still believed the soft voice could be heard. I still believed that kindness passed down through generations would come back like spring after winter. Inevitable and full of bloom, the day Paul asked me to marry him, we were standing by the river, the one that carved its way past the edge of our town like a secret. He didn't get down on one knee, didn't have a ring. He just took my hand and said, "Let's not waste any more time." And I, foolish with love, thought that was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. I moved into his family's farmhouse, 2 miles past the county line. It was smaller than ours, with creaky floors and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. His mother had passed, and his father kept mostly to himself, but it was ours. For the first time, I had a space that was mine to fill with Sunday roast smells, and curtains I sewed by hand, and a rocking chair by the window where I'd sit each evening with a cup of tea, dreaming of babies. When our first daughter came, I wept, not because of the pain, though Lord knows I remember it clear as day, like something ripping from the inside out. No, I wept because when they placed her in my arms, slick and red and wailing like the sky had cracked open, I saw my mother in her eyes. I saw myself. I saw something I thought would never leave me. She wrapped her tiny hand around my finger, and I knew then, this would be my life's great love. I named her Sarah, soft and strong. The name had weight, the kind of name you could whisper in prayer or shout across a field. She was born in 1958, just as Elvis was starting to fade and Buddy Holly had taken his last flight. The world was changing fast, but we were slow and steady, like good bread rising in a warm kitchen. Sarah was my shadow from the start. She followed me everywhere, clutching the hem of my dress or riding my hip as I shelled peas, kneaded dough, or hung clothes to dry. I sang to her every night, old hymns, lullabies, even nonsense rhymes I made up on the spot. And when she was old enough to speak, she'd finish my sentences like we shared the same breath. She used to hold my hand so tight, my fingers would go numb. Sometimes I'd pretend to pull away, just to hear her say, "No, Mama, stay." And oh, my sweethearts, how I stayed. I stayed through the long nights of fever, through tantrums and first teeth, through scraped knees, and birthday cakes, and Sunday shoes too tight on growing feet. I stayed when I was tired. I stayed when I was lonely. I stayed when the world asked me to be more than I had to give, because she was mine, and I thought, if I just poured enough love into her, she'd never forget where she came from. But love is not a ledger. It doesn't guarantee return, and someday, your child grows taller than your shoulder, and their silence grows louder than any lullaby you ever sang. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was the way her head fit perfectly under my chin when we sat on the porch swing. The way her giggle could make the whole world seem new. The way she'd fall asleep with her hand wrapped around mine, like she was anchoring herself to something safe. So I anchored myself to her too, and for a time, for a long, golden time, it was enough. I don't remember the first time Sarah pulled her hand away, not exactly. It wasn't one of those big, dramatic moments, not a slammed door or a screaming match. No, it was smaller than that, quieter, like a door that used to creak suddenly falling silent. You don't notice until you realize it hasn't made a sound in weeks. She was 12, maybe 13, the first time I truly felt it, that subtle weight shift between us. We were in the kitchen, flour dusting the air, her apron tied crooked like always. I'd asked her to help roll out biscuit dough like we used to do every Sunday, but that day, her hands hesitated. Her eyes stayed fixed on the clock. And when I offered her the rolling pin, she said, "Do I have to?" Just like that. Not rude, not angry, just distant, like I'd spoken through glass. I remember I smiled, said, "Of course not, sweetheart," and handed the pin to myself. But inside me, something shifted, like a shelf sagging under a familiar weight. Only now the weight was gone, and the empty space left behind a kind of ache I wasn't ready to name. That year, the world outside our little farm started growing teeth. Gas prices rose, folks whispered about strikes in the cities, and the radio buzzed with words like civil rights, draft, Vietnam. I didn't know what to make of it all. We still had supper at 6. We still said grace before eating. But something in the air felt unsettled, like a wind that wouldn't stop knocking at the windows. And, Sarah, she started asking questions, not the kind you answer with bedtime stories. She wanted to know why the colored children still had to sit at the back of the bus when we went to town. She wanted to know why the man at the diner called her friend Ruby's daddy boy, even though he had gray in his beard. And she wanted to know why I stayed quiet when it happened. I didn't have answers, not ones I was proud of. Anyway, I was raised on respect, on keeping your head down, on doing what you could and praying for the rest. But Sarah, she had fire in her bones, and I'll admit, my sweethearts, there was a time I was afraid of that fire. She started spending more time at the library in town, said the school books didn't tell the truth about anything. She'd come home talking about Malcolm X and marches and letters from soldiers. She said the world was broken and needed fixing. I said the world had always been broken, and we just did our best in it. That didn't sit right with her. I could see it in her jaw, tight, stubborn, just like mine. I tried to talk to her the way Mama had talked to me, firm but soft, practical. You do what's right by your family. I'd say, you keep your head on straight, don't go chasing trouble. But Sarah wasn't chasing trouble. She was chasing truth, and maybe I didn't know how to help her find it. The distance between us grew like ivy, slow at first, barely noticeable, but soon it wrapped around everything. Our dinners got quieter. She started locking her bedroom door, and she stopped reaching for my hand when we crossed the street. She still loved me. I believed that, but she had started loving the world, too, and it was a world I didn't fully understand. One evening, I found a pamphlet under her pillow, a flyer about a march being planned 2 towns over. It showed people with fists in the air, their faces fierce, their voices calling for justice. I remember holding it in my hands, my fingers trembling, when she came home that night. I asked her about it. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just looked at me and said, "I want to be more than just someone's daughter, Mama." And in that moment, I felt like I was losing her, not to anger or rebellion, but to something deeper, a calling, a hunger for a world beyond our kitchen walls. I nodded, said, I understood, but I didn't, not really. I just knew the wind had changed, and no matter how tightly I held my apron strings, she was already drifting with it. There were things I didn't tell her, things a mother keeps folded away, like old linens, too worn to show but too sacred to throw out, like how I used to sneak into her room at night, long after she'd stopped asking for lullabies, just to make sure she was breathing. I'd stand there, hand on the doorframe, listening for that soft rhythm, the rise and fall of her chest. I did it even when she was 16, even when she'd started wearing lipstick and staying out past dark, because some habits don't leave you, even after your children do. But that year, that long, bitter year, it wasn't just her who was changing. Everything around us was. Paul, my husband. Her father had started drinking more than usual, not the weekend beers he'd always had after fixing the tractor, but something heavier, something meaner. He never raised a hand to me or to Sarah, but he raised his voice often. His laugh turned sharp, his silences longer, and the smell of whiskey hung around his clothes like smoke that never cleared. He didn't understand her either, said she was getting uppity, said she'd forget where she came from, said we needed to teach her discipline before the world taught her the hard way. I argued with him once, just once. I stood in the kitchen, hands on the flour-dusted counter, and said, "She's not disobedient, Paul, she's just growing." And he looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, indifference. "She's not ours anymore," he said. "Not really. She's the world's now." And I felt that like a slap, because she was mine, wasn't she? She came from me. I carried her in my belly, fed her from my body, soothed her when the world was too loud. I memorized every freckle, every favorite color, every ache she didn't have the words for. And now, Now she wouldn't even eat dinner with us if she could help it. She started lying. 2 little things: where she'd been, who she'd seen. I knew because her eyes darted when I asked questions, and her shoes had red clay on them from a part of town she wasn't supposed to be in, but I never confronted her. I just folded another towel, stirred another pot, pretended I hadn't noticed. Her hands smelled like cigarette smoke. One night, I heard the front screen door creak open around midnight. I slipped out of bed, barefoot, heart pounding. I saw her standing by the mailbox, clutching a small envelope in both hands like it was burning her. She looked lost, not wild, not guilty, just lost. I stepped onto the porch and whispered, "Sarah." She didn't jump, didn't turn. She just said, "I had to send it, Mama, I had to." And then she walked past me, into the house, into her room, and closed the door. I never asked what was in that envelope, but I stayed up the rest of the night wondering what she was sending out into the world, and whether it would ever come back. It was around then she stopped calling me Mama, started saying Ma instead, clipped, distant. And you know what broke my heart the most? That I never corrected her. I just let the old name die on her lips like it hadn't meant the whole world to me once. She stopped coming to church, too. Said she didn't feel God there anymore. Said she couldn't sit in the same pews where people sang about love but never lived it. And I stayed silent, because how could I argue with her when deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. But even silence is a kind of choice, and that silence became the space between us. One afternoon, I came home from the market and found her room stripped bare, the posters gone, the photographs tucked away, the books, once stacked in wild towers on her dresser, now boxed and labeled in careful black ink, College Fall 75. I sat on her bed, hers still, but not for long, and ran my hand across the worn quilt I'd stitched for her when she was 10. The one with the blue patches from her baby dress and the frayed corner she used to chew on when she couldn't sleep. I pressed my cheek to it like it might still carry the scent of her hair, but it didn't. She was already slipping through the cracks, not in one grand exit, but piece by piece, word by word, letter by letter, and I just stood there, watching her fade. I tried to make her favorite meal the night before she left. Fried chicken the way Mama taught me, mashed potatoes with the skins left in, green beans cooked low and slow, in bacon grease, and sweet tea, so strong it could knock your socks off. I even made cornbread in the cast iron skillet, the one Sarah used to call the magic pan when she was little because it made the edges crispy just right. I set the table with the good cloth, the one we only used at Christmas or when the preacher came by. I lit a candle, just one, for softness, for ceremony, for hope, maybe. She came in wearing jeans that were torn at the knees and a t-shirt with the word revolution scrawled across the front. Her hair was wild from the wind, her face flushed. She looked like someone on the edge of a new life. She didn't notice the table setting, didn't say anything about the food. She just poured herself a glass of water and said, "I'm taking the 6:40 bus." That was it. I sat across from her, my hands resting in my lap. My heart caught somewhere between pride and grief, and tried to make my voice steady. "Did you pack your quilt?" I asked. She blinked at me, then nodded. "Yeah, I packed it." I wanted to ask her more. I wanted to ask if she'd write, if she'd call, if she'd come home for Christmas. I wanted to ask if she still loved me, if any piece of her still remembered how we used to dance barefoot in the kitchen to Patsy Cline while the biscuits baked. But I didn't, because I knew the answer might ruin me, so I just said, "Good." We ate mostly in silence. I passed the chicken. She picked at it. The candle flickered between us, casting shadows on the wall that looked like strangers reaching out and missing each other. When she was done, she stood, took her plate to the sink, and turned to me. "I need to go pack the rest," she said. I nodded. She lingered for a second, just long enough for me to believe she might say something more, but she didn't. She just walked down the hall, her footsteps light, like she was already half gone. I didn't follow her. I sat there long after the candle went out. When the time came, I helped her carry her suitcase to the edge of the driveway. Paul didn't come out. He hadn't said a word to her all week. The air between them had grown cold and solid, like something dead they both refused to bury. The sun was just starting to set, the sky glowing orange and violet, like bruises healing in reverse. We stood there together, waiting, not speaking, and then the bus, a long sigh of brakes, a door hissing open. She hugged me, brief, quick, not like she used to. Not like the little girl who clung to me after nightmares and skinned knees, just a soft press of shoulder to shoulder. "I'll call when I get there," she said. I nodded, and then she was gone. I watched the bus disappear into the dust, her silhouette fading behind the glass until it was just sky and road and the smell of diesel, and my hand. It stayed raised long after she was out of sight, like maybe if I held it there long enough, she'd feel it, like maybe she'd reach back across the distance and hold it one last time. But she didn't. The next day, her room looked smaller without her, quieter. I sat on the bed and ran my hand over the pillow, pressing it to my chest, like it could bring her heartbeat back. A week passed, then two. No call, no letter. I told myself the phone lines must have been busy, that maybe the letter got lost, that school was hard, and she'd reach out when she settled in. But weeks became months, and silence became her new language. Every day I walked down to the mailbox, hoping. Every night I sat by the phone, waiting, and slowly, painfully, I began to understand. She wasn't just gone, she was choosing not to come back. That knowledge sat inside me like a stone in a shoe, small, but sharp enough to wound with every step. Paul didn't speak of her, not once, as if she'd never existed, but I did. I spoke her name out loud every morning, just so it wouldn't vanish from the air. I wrote her letters, long ones, about the garden, about the neighbors, about how proud I was. I told her I missed her voice. I told her the dog still waited by the porch for her. I told her I loved her always, always. I mailed them all, every week, like prayers, but none came back. And that's how the shift becomes permanent, my dears, not with a bang, but with an echo that never gets answered. The change didn't happen all at once. No, that would have been easier in a way, a sharp shock you can at least cry out against. But this came slow, like a tide rising in the night. It began with little things. Miriam stopped coming by the house as often. At first, it was just the usual, busy with school, or I'll drop by next weekend, I promise. I didn't press. You don't press when a young girl's trying to find herself in the world. You cheer from the sidelines. You pray she remembers your name when the noise of life grows loud. But weeks passed, then months. She missed my birthday that year. For the first time since she could walk, I made my favorite peach crumble, just in case. Set out the 2 little plates like I always did. Sat by the window for hours, watching the gate. Nothing, not even a call. I told myself she was tired, that something had come up, that her heart was still stitched to mine, just stretched a little thin. But the truth, my dear, it started showing in the spaces she left behind. I finally asked Ruth, her mother, what was going on. I didn't want to pry, but my hands were starting to shake more, and my knees weren't as forgiving as they used to be, and the quiet, well, it felt cruel. Ruth looked at me like she didn't know what to say, her lips pressed tight, eyes darting. She's growing up, Mama, let her be. She needs space. From me, I asked. She didn't answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out into the garden, barefoot in the dirt, like I used to when I was a little girl. The night smelled like wilted marigolds and dry earth. The moon hung heavy like it knew something I didn't. Something had shifted, something deep. And then, 1 week later, I found it. A letter, folded twice, stuck behind the phone in Ruth's hallway. I wasn't snooping, my dears, I swear it. I had just dropped by to return a casserole dish, but when I saw the handwriting on the envelope I knew. It was Miriam's, slanted, neat, always curling, her wise like she was painting secrets. It was addressed to someone named Eleanor. I froze. Eleanor was Ruth's middle name, mine too, for that matter, but I'd never heard Miriam call her mother that, not once. The way the letters formed, it felt formal, cold. I don't know what made me do it, sweethearts, but I opened it, and I read words that tasted like ash. I can't keep pretending. She clings so tightly to a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. Every visit feels like I'm walking into a museum where I'm the exhibit. I love her, but it's suffocating. I can't be who she needs me to be. Please stop asking me to go. I didn't cry right away. Isn't that strange? I just stood there, holding that letter like it was made of glass and grief. She hadn't meant for me to read it. She'd written it for Ruth. My own daughter had known, and instead of talking to me, they talked about me. I left the dish on the counter and walked home with my mouth dry and my hands trembling. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands for a long time. These hands that used to button her dresses, wipe her tears, hold her when she was sick. I thought about how many times I'd told her she was my joy, my second chance, how I used to stroke her hair and hum that old lullaby from 1958, "You are my sunshine," and now I was a museum, a guilt trip, a burden she didn't ask for. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. By the third morning, I stopped sending letters, not out of spite, my dear, no, out of shame. I started to wonder if maybe I had held on too tight. Maybe I was clinging to memories like they could breathe life into a future that didn't want me in it. I spent most days in silence. The radio stayed off, the television gathered dust, the garden went wild with weeds. I didn't even light the stove most evenings. Crackers and jam were enough. The phone rang sometimes. Telemarketers, once or twice Ruth, but never her. Not once. My neighbor Doreen asked if I wanted to come to bingo night. I told her no, thank you, not tonight, and then I said that for months. One afternoon, a Tuesday, I sat in my kitchen with the windows open, and I heard laughter from down the road, children running, a dog barking, the smell of laundry on the line. All of it felt far away, like life was happening just a few houses down. And I'd somehow missed the invitation. That was the week I picked up my pen again, wrote her a letter, no guilt, no questions, just love. She never answered. But I kept writing, because sometimes, my dear, the only way to stop drowning is to whisper your name into the dark, and hope someone, somewhere, remembers who you were before you disappeared. The next morning, the house smelled like burnt toast and bitter coffee, the usual melody of morning. The creak of floorboards, the hum of the kettle, the rustle of the newspaper, had been replaced by a silence that scratched at my skin like wool in summer. I stood in the kitchen, half expecting her to come around the corner in her robe, muttering something about me oversalting the eggs, but the chair across from mine remained empty. I poured coffee anyway, 2 cups, out of habit, or maybe hope. I kept trying to piece it all together. What had I missed? When had our soft silences turned to hard ones? There had been no door slammed, no declaration, just the slow and steady drift of someone folding inward, away from me, that week. I wrote her a letter, not one of those plain ones with weather, updates and recipes, but something real. I wrote, I miss you. I don't know what I did, if I did anything at all, but the air feels heavier without you here. I slipped in a little photo of the two of us that summer at the lake, her hand in mine, water up to our knees, no response. So I wrote again, and again. I became that person, the one waiting, by the mailbox, counting the days like rosary beads, hoping for a sign. I told myself she was busy, that maybe the letters hadn't reached her, but deep down, I knew, sweethearts, when someone turns away, not by accident, but by choice, you can feel the cold of it before the door even shuts. The letters became my prayers, every envelope sealed with some desperate part of me I didn't know how to speak out loud. I even started slipping little things into them, the corner of a pressed flower from the backyard, a drawing her youngest cousin made of the two of them, a copy of a recipe card written in my own mama's hand. Still nothing. The whispers began not long after. A cousin said she'd seen her in town, laughing over coffee with a woman I didn't recognize. Someone else said she was calling herself by a new name now. I didn't believe them. Couldn't. Not my girl. Not the one who used to braid my hair and read to me by candlelight during the power outages. Then, the birthday came. The one I always made a big fuss over. Every year I sent her a small package, handmade, wrapped with string, with a card that smelled of lavender because I kept them all in a drawer lined with sachets. That year, the box came back, returned to sender, unopened. My hands trembled as I held it, not from age, no, but from grief, the kind that doesn't bleed out but stays under the skin like a bruise you keep bumping. I sat in the hallway for an hour, clutching that box like a relic, a coffin for hope. There was no explosion, no one moment where the world split in two, just 1,000 tiny cuts, each unopened letter, each unanswered call, each second spent trying to understand something that no one would explain. People around me started to change too. Family gatherings became careful, like everyone was stepping over a broken floorboard they didn't want to fix. No one asked how I was doing, or if they did, they didn't wait for the answer. I once tried to bring her up at a dinner, just as simple, do you know if she's all right? And the whole table went still, like the air had thickened. My grandson, bless him, reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, but even he didn't say anything. That was the loneliest moment, I think. Not the silence in my house, or the returned letters, but realizing that people had made their peace with her absence, that the world had moved on, without asking me if I could keep up. I kept her room just as she'd left it, the stuffed rabbit on the bed, the chipped nail polish on the dresser. Her scent had faded from the air, but in my bones, she was still there. Every creak in the floorboard, every time the kettle screamed, I half turned expecting her. Then came the Sunday I couldn't go to church. My knees were swollen, and the winter had clawed into my bones. I asked one of the cousins to light a candle for me. Told him, light it for her, wherever she is. He blinked like I'd asked him to dig up a ghost, but he nodded. That night, I sat by the window with my tea. The moon was out, full and sharp. I imagined her looking up at it too, wherever she was. I whispered into the dark, I still love you, you know, even if you've forgotten how I sound. And for a moment, I thought I heard a voice in the wind say, I remember, but maybe that was just memory playing tricks, or maybe some part of her still heard me, still held on. I didn't know anymore. I only knew that something had broken. And it wasn't just her, it was me. It was all of us. I stopped writing letters for a little while, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was afraid no one would read them anymore. After Emmeline left with her father and I stayed behind in that quiet, aching house, the silence grew so loud it rang in my ears at night. The only things that seemed to move were the dust particles floating through the streaks of sunlight in the kitchen, and the calendar pages I stopped flipping, letting them curl like dried leaves. But there were things that had to be done. Survival didn't wait for grief to settle. I sold the piano first, that old upright with its chipped ivory keys and humming ghost of harmony. It hurt, yes, sweethearts. I'd taught Emmeline her first notes on it. I remember her fingers trembling as she played Twinkle, Twinkle, glancing up at me to see if she was doing it right. But now, it was just furniture, and I needed to keep the lights on. I started cleaning houses. Me, who once embroidered curtains and made little butter molds, shaped like roses for church potlucks, now scrubbing baseboards and picking dried gum from underneath children's desks. My hands cracked, my knees stiffened, my back screamed. But I kept going. One of the houses I cleaned was for a young couple with twins. Sweet little boys, always sticky with jam and bursting into giggles when they saw me. Their mother, Marie, had once been in my Girl Scout troop when I was a leader decades earlier. She didn't recognize me at first. I didn't blame her. Grief ages you in ways the mirror can't quite keep up with. When she finally did, her eyes softened, and she left me extra soup in the fridge once a week. I never asked for more. Some evenings I sat on the edge of my bed, bare feet dangling like a child's, staring at the place on the wall where Emmeline's school picture used to hang. I'd taken it down after she stopped answering my letters, not out of anger, but because the eyes in that picture looked like they didn't belong to me anymore. She had become a stranger in that frame. My sweet Emmeline. I still don't know if she ever saw the truth of it. That I didn't choose to let her go. That the courts didn't ask what a mother could give besides money or a stable zip code. They didn't see the quiet strength of a woman who held her daughter through croup and night terrors and birthday meltdowns. They only saw what I couldn't prove, that love alone wasn't enough on paper. The neighbors grew distant. Some whispered that I must have done something terrible to lose custody. Others simply stopped looking me in the eye. I can't blame them, really. Misfortune makes people uneasy. They treat it like it's contagious. But then came the phone call from my sister Noreen. She was sick, really sick. Breast cancer had crept into her bones. And suddenly, the woman who once could carry hay bales and boss around 6 brothers with a single glare was curled up in a recliner. In Nebraska, pale and trembling, I packed my bags and left. What little I had, I sold or stored in old suitcases stacked like tombstones in the attic. I gave up the house, the routines, the comfort of familiarity, to be her nurse, her cook, her company in those long, heavy months. I remember spoon-feeding her applesauce and playing hymns on the old radio just to drown out the sound of her coughing. Some nights, when she was finally asleep, I'd write to Emmeline again. Not letters I ever mailed, no return address, just pages, and pages that I folded and tucked under Noreen's mattress like they might warm the floorboards. I told her about the snow in Nebraska, how it glittered like broken glass under the moon. I told her about the time Noreen whispered, "Don't forget to wear my red dress to the funeral, it hides the stains." I told her how hard it was to miss someone who was still alive when Noreen passed. It was just me again. No daughter, no husband, no home of my own. But still, I got up each morning, brewed coffee, made toast, walked to the store, paid rent in a senior boarding house where no one asked too many questions. We all had pasts, my dears, but some were quieter than others. There's a kind of dignity in just surviving, not triumph, not glory, just surviving. And sometimes, that's all you can do when your heart's been pulled apart so many times you forget how it looked whole. There was a winter, I think it was 1987, when the heat went out in my little room. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, made your joints feel like glass. I remember sleeping with 3 sweaters on, old newspapers tucked beneath the thin mattress to trap warmth. I'd boil water on the stove and place the pot in the center of the room just to feel a hint of steam in the air. I didn't complain, didn't ask for help. I'd long learned that pride is the last thing a woman has when everything else is stripped away. But even that was starting to fray. That winter, I got sick, some sort of bronchial infection that rattled in my chest like stones in a tin can. I'd cough so hard I'd see stars. Still, I showed up to work at the bakery 2 days a week, wiping down counters and packing loaves into brown paper bags, smiling at folks whose names I never learned. The smell of warm bread was the only comfort I had then. Cinnamon rolls, still sticky in the morning heat, rye with caraway seeds, sour loaves with hard, crackling crusts. That scent reminded me I was still alive, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. There was a woman at the bakery, Miss Alberta. She was nearing 70, wore the same green apron every day, and had no patience for laziness or excuses. She didn't say much, but one day, after I nearly collapsed refilling the front case, she handed me a thermos. "Tea with honey," she muttered. "You're too quiet to quit." I never forgot that. Some kindnesses are so rare they burn like stars in the memory. Alberta never asked about my past, never pried, but every Thursday after that, there was a cup of tea waiting. No words, just warmth. That winter taught me how little I needed, and how strong I truly was. People think strength is loud, or angry, or showy. They think it wears boots and carries hammers and storms through doors, but that's not the kind of strength most of us live with. The real kind, it's quiet. It washes the same dish for the 1000th time. It gets out of bed when no one is watching. It walks to the pharmacy in the snow because you're all out of aspirin and there's no one to ask. It holds the pain gently, so no one else has to carry it. I started volunteering at the church after that winter. They didn't ask for much, just someone to fold bulletins and keep the coffee urn going on Sunday mornings. I liked the small talk, the routine of it. No one there knew what I'd lost. They just saw a woman who showed up early and left last. The pastor's wife, Mrs. Carver, once called me a pillar. I nearly laughed. A pillar, sweetheart, me. But maybe she was right. I had become something solid, something silent, something that held up the roof for others, even as the floor beneath me cracked. That's how survival works. You don't rebuild all at once. You don't rise up like a phoenix. You just endure, one scraped knee at a time, one missed letter, one quiet meal, eaten at a kitchen table, with only your own breath for company, and then something happens. A child smiles at you in the grocery line. A neighbor waves through the window. A song plays on the radio that you haven't heard since 1962. And for a moment, just a moment, the weight on your back feels a little lighter. That's what kept me going. Not hope. That word had worn thin by then, but persistence, a refusal to vanish. Some women are made of lace and laughter, others, of steel and silence. I had become the second kind, and though my hands shook sometimes, I kept writing those letters, even if I never mailed them. Even if they went into the drawer beside my bed with all the others, they were my proof that I remembered, that I loved, that I still existed, that one day, maybe, she might read them, and know that I never stopped being her mother. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the house, as if it were breathing beside me, old wood shifting like bones settling after too much strain. I'd gotten used to the cold spot on the mattress where no one lay, the silence where his snore used to buzz like a dull saw. The worst kind of loneliness, my dears, is the kind that still remembers what company felt like. In the mornings, I rose before the sun, habit, mostly. My body still believed there were mouths to feed and uniforms to iron. I kept the kettle boiling just in case someone knocked on the door, though no one ever did. The postman became the only soul I saw most weeks. I'd pretend to be fussing with the roses whenever he passed, so he'd wave. I needed that wave, you understand. It was proof I hadn't turned invisible. I worked, not because I had to, though the money didn't hurt, but because moving gave me purpose. I took on sewing for the neighborhood women, buttons, hems, curtains, the odd christening gown. My hands still remembered what they were made for. I'd prick my fingers sometimes, but the sting kept me grounded. Pain, in a strange way, reminded me I was still here. I also took up cleaning at the local church, dusting pews and polishing brass until my arms ached. The priest, Father Mullins, once asked if I believed in forgiveness. I told him I believed in clean floors and warm teeth. That seemed like enough for now. He never pushed after that. The children wrote less and less. Birthdays brought cards with pre-written messages, no more little drawings or notes in colored pencil. The handwriting got more distant, the ink more uniform, typed, eventually, and then not at all. I told myself they were busy, not cruel. Life is like that. You blink and decades pass, but still. There's a difference between forgetting and choosing not to remember. I made soup in large pots, even when it was just me. I'd freeze it in neat little containers, pretending it was for when they visit. But truth be told, it was easier to make enough for 6 and eat it alone for a week than it was to cook for one. The house echoed less when the stove was humming. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to the air, asking questions aloud, like did I do right by them, or would Mama be proud of me now? And when the silence answered, I'd nod like I understood. Maybe I did. Oh sweethearts, I don't tell you all this to make you feel sorry for me. I survived. That's what women like me do. We adapt, we endure, we tuck the hurt away like laundry, in a chest, folding each ache neatly so it won't wrinkle our face in front of company. There's a quiet kind of strength in staying, in not leaving when it gets hard, in holding a family together even after it's shattered. I stitched what I could, I swept up the broken bits, I made a life out of the scraps left behind, and still, every now and then, I'd find myself standing at the edge of the front porch, eyes on the road, wondering if someone might come home to me. They didn't, but I waited anyway. That's what love does to a woman. Even when it's been stretched thin and frayed at the ends, even when it's silent, even when it's gone, it waits. But then, I saw the photo, Emily said, her voice a whisper, the same one that was in the box, the woman holding a baby on a porch swing. My mom said that woman was someone the family never talked about, but I swear it's you. I recognized the eyes. Yours are just like mine. I dropped the phone. I didn't mean to. It just slipped from my hand like it had been doused in ice water. The photo, I remembered the day it was taken, 1973, a warm, syrupy afternoon. I was sitting on the porch swing, holding Helen, my Helen, wrapped in that yellow crochet blanket I made with trembling hands during the last days of my second pregnancy. Her head was tucked under my chin, her baby hair smelling of lavender and milk. I remember smiling for the camera, because Martha had begged me to. She said we needed something to prove she was real, and then she'd taken the picture, tucked it into her handbag, and drove away with my baby the very next day. That photograph was supposed to be gone, burned, forgotten, like the story itself. I picked up the phone again, my heart pounding so hard I thought the floor might shake loose. Emily, I said, my voice thinner than I remembered it ever sounding. You said it was in a box. She explained everything, how her grandmother, Martha, had passed away the year before, how they were cleaning out her house and found a sealed tin behind a false panel in the linen closet. It contained baby shoes, a hospital tag, a crocheted yellow blanket with a frayed corner, and that photograph. I know it doesn't make sense, she said, but when I asked my mom about it, she shut down. She said there were things best left buried, but I couldn't let it go. Something in my gut told me you needed to see this. That night, I sat by the window, the letter in my lap, and the phone pressed to my chest like a heartbeat I didn't trust. My mind wandered through time like a ghost, retracing its last steps, to the day I gave birth alone in that county hospital, to the lie I was told, that my baby hadn't survived, that she'd passed in the nursery hours after delivery. Only, I'd never seen her body, no death certificate, no burial, just silence, numb, endless silence. I was too broken to fight then, too poor, too grief-soaked, too naive to know how the world worked when men in suits made decisions about women like me behind closed doors. But I remembered Martha's kindness during that time. She had been my nurse, gentle hands, quiet eyes. She'd held my hand when I screamed in labor, tucked my hair behind my ear when I wept after. She was the only one who looked me in the eye when they told me the baby was gone. And now, 50 years later, her granddaughter was calling me. I want to meet you, Emily said. Please, I need to know the truth. I agreed. We met at the cafe down on Miller Street, the one with the red booths and old jukebox that's more rust than music now. I wore my best sweater, The blue one with the little pearl buttons, the one I hadn't worn since the last family gathering, long before the laughter began happening behind closed doors. Emily walked in with the sunlight haloing her curls. Her hands shook just slightly when she reached for mine. "I've never done anything like this," she said. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just need answers." I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were my eyes. Her cheekbones were my sister's. Her voice held the same rhythm as my Helen's once did. Back when she was a child and still called me Grandma, without shame. I took a slow breath. "Emily," I said, "there are stories this world hides because the truth is too ugly to look at. But I've looked at it for 50 years. I think it's time someone else did, too." So I told her everything about the night they took my baby. How the papers I signed while delirious from blood loss were adoption waivers I didn't understand. How the priest who visited told me it was God's will. How Martha cried when she visited 2 weeks later, whispering, "She's safe, I swear, but you must never look for her." I told Emily how I searched anyway, at first wrote letters, called agencies, even walked into the county clerk's office with shaking hands, but they told me records were sealed, and after a while, I stopped trying, because trying felt like bleeding again, and I couldn't bleed anymore. When I finished, Emily was crying, not the hysterical kind, just quiet tears, the kind you cry when a puzzle piece finally clicks into place and it's uglier than you hoped. "My mother," she whispered, "she always said something felt off, like she didn't belong. She told me once that she had dreams of another woman rocking her, singing a lullaby she never heard in real life. She said the woman smelled like chamomile." I covered my mouth. I used to steep chamomile into the bathwater before I held baby Helen to my chest. "My God," I whispered. "She remembers." Emily nodded. "She's sick now," she said. "Early onset Alzheimer's. She doesn't say much anymore, but would you come? Just once. Even if she doesn't remember, I want her to see you." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't, because that's the thing about survival. Sweethearts, you spend so long learning how to endure without justice, without answers, without closure, that when something finally surfaces, it feels like a trick, a trap, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was grace. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "I'll come." I didn't sleep the night before I saw her. I lay there with my hands folded over my stomach, listening to the house groan around me. Every creak of the floorboards felt like an echo of a memory. Every sigh of the wind against the windows whispered the lullabies I used to hum into empty air. For so long, I imagined this moment, her eyes meeting mine, her voice stumbling over Mama, the silence finally breaking. But reality never matches the stories we build in our minds. And I was too old to warn, to pretend otherwise. Emily picked me up in a little silver car. She wore her nervousness like a second skin, tapping her fingers on the wheel as we drove through streets I hadn't seen in years, past the bakery that used to smell of cinnamon rolls on Sundays, past the elementary school with the mural still fading on its wall, past all the ghosts I had buried in memory. "She has good days and bad," Emily said quietly. "I don't know what today will be, but she's been calm lately, gentle." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The house was simple, pale blue siding, a row of daffodils by the porch, wind chimes clinking softly like the fragile hush before a storm. "She's inside," Emily whispered, as if anything too loud might crack the moment wide open. "I'll give you 2 a minute," and then she opened the door. I stepped into the living room, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. There she was, my Helen, older now of course, gray at the temples, a little thinner than I remembered ever imagining her. She sat in a rocking chair near the window, a soft shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hands curled around the arms of the chair like she needed to anchor herself to something steady. She was staring at the trees outside, quiet, still, as though her soul had gone out walking and left her body behind. I walked closer. She didn't look at me, but then I spoke. "Chamomile," I whispered. Her head turned, slow, hesitant, and her eyes blinked, unfocused. "I used to bathe you in chamomile," I said, my voice trembling, "every night, back when the world was new, and no one had lied to us yet." She blinked again, then, softly, barely audible, she spoke. "I know your voice." I sank to my knees beside her, her hand lifted slightly, hovering in the air before brushing my cheek, like she was remembering something long buried in the dark. Her fingers trembled against my skin. "I dreamed about you," she whispered. "When I was little, you sang to me." I nodded, tears sliding silently down my face. "I never stopped. I said. Even when they said you were gone. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The wind chimes outside caught a breeze and sang their thin, fragile song. I was told I was adopted, she murmured. They told me my mother was unfit, sick, that it was for the best. They lied, I said, the words like glass in my throat. She opened her eyes again. There was no anger in them, only a quiet, aching sadness. I always felt like something was missing, she said, like a door had been closed in my soul before I ever learned how to knock. I tried, I whispered, I tried to find you. They sealed the records, they threatened me. I didn't have money, I didn't have anyone. I was just a girl with milk still in her breasts and a hole in her chest. She touched her heart then, the same spot, and nodded. We sat like that for a long while. No explanations, no demands, just presence, just time, trying to stitch back together what the years had shredded. Later, Emily brought us tea. She handed her mother the yellow crocheted blanket, the one from the tin box, and her mother clutched it like it was air itself. I remember this, she whispered. I used to carry it everywhere. They said I came with it. I smiled through the ache. You were wrapped in it the day you were born. And then Helen looked at me, truly looked. Did you name me? She asked. I nodded. I called you Helen, after my grandmother. They renamed you, didn't they? Yes, she said. Marianne, but Helen. That feels right. We didn't speak of Martha much. There was no hatred, no accusations, just silence. I think, in her own way, she believed she was rescuing a child. Maybe she thought I'd move on. Maybe she didn't understand that a mother doesn't move on. She only learns to live with a wound that never stops weeping. Before I left that evening, Helen took my hand. You're not what I expected, she said, but you feel like home. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure, not exactly, but peace. The truth didn't return my stolen years. It didn't erase the nights I cried into my pillow, or rewrite the birthdays I spent alone. But it brought light to a shadowed corner of my soul. It let me say, out loud, what I was never allowed to say. I had a daughter. They took her from me, but she remembers. I went home that night in silence. Emily offered to drive, but I asked for a little time alone. Just me and the wind and the cracked sidewalks of a town that had changed and stayed the same all at once. I walked slowly, letting the night air settle around my shoulders like an old shawl. My feet ached, my knees popped, but I moved forward. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anything. I had found her, but finding her wasn't the ending I once imagined. It was something softer, stranger, a doorway instead of a final page. Because now came the choice, not whether I loved her. That was never in question. No, the real decision was what to do with everything I'd learned. The adoption records, they had been sealed so tightly for so long. But Emily had found a crack, and tucked in that crack was a truth I hadn't expected. A letter. It was written in 1969, barely a year after Helen was taken from me. A copy was in the folder Emily had brought to me the day after our meeting. Tied up in twine and stiff from age, I unfolded it slowly, like I was unraveling a piece of myself. It wasn't from Martha, it was from Helen's adoptive father, a man I'd never known existed. His words were blunt, uneasy, regretful. My wife insisted we not contact the girl's mother. I disagreed, but I was young and unsteady in my convictions. I write this now in the event that one day the child wants to know her story. Her birth mother was not a criminal. She was not sick. She was a girl caught in something crueler than either of us could fix. I believed she deserved to know. My wife did not. I lost that argument, and I've regretted it every day since. He'd enclosed a photograph, blurry, faded, of me and Helen, on that one day we visited the county fair, just before she was taken. I must have given it to Martha during the handover. I never knew she kept it. I never knew she showed it to anyone. And there, at the bottom of the page, was a final line. If you're reading this, I hope she found her mother. I hope I didn't fail her twice. I sat with that letter for hours, cried over it, screamed at it, and then I held it against my heart, because, the truth is, I had spent so many years building Martha into the villain, the thief, the liar, and maybe she had been all of those things, but she had also been afraid of losing control, of repeating history, of letting a girl she couldn't understand make her own choices. She wasn't just cruel, she was scared. That doesn't make it right, but it does make it human. A week later, Emily and Helen invited me to dinner. Nothing fancy, just chicken casserole and buttered peas, and the kind of quiet chatter that families do. when they're figuring out how to be near each other without breaking. Helen wore the yellow blanket over her lap, and when she looked at me, it wasn't as a stranger anymore. She laughed, really laughed, when I told her about the time she dumped an entire bowl of oatmeal onto my Bible during morning prayers. You were maybe 2, I said, smiling, and I thought God was punishing me. I was just hungry, she said with a grin. We sat at that table until the candles burned low, and as I watched her speak to Emily, I felt something shift deep inside me, like a wound beginning to scab over for the first time in decades. She was okay. She had survived, so had I, but still, the question lingered. What now? Do I tell everyone? Do I drag the old story into the light, put names and blame out where they can't hide? Do I give voice to the part of me that still wants the world to know what was stolen? Or do I let it rest? Do I guard what we've rebuilt, fragile as it is, from the fire of exposure? I sat on the porch 2 nights later, rocking slowly, watching the stars push against the dark. The wind moved gently through the trees, not a storm, not a whisper, just presence. And I thought of all the women like me, the ones whose babies were taken and renamed and lied to. The ones who walked into hospitals full and left with empty arms. The ones who were told they didn't matter, that they were shameful, that silence was best. I thought of Helen's quiet voice saying, "You're not what I expected, but you feel like home." And I thought of all the little girls who grew up with a question inside them. So I made my choice. I wrote it all down, every piece of it, the meetings, the records, the lies, the letter, the photograph. I didn't write it for revenge. I wrote it for the ones who would come after me, the daughters searching, the mothers grieving, the generations that deserve to know that silence is not the same as truth. I mailed the pages to a small historical archive run by women like me, women who had lost, women who had survived. They wrote back with a simple note. "Thank you. You're not alone anymore." And to Martha, I lit a candle, just one, no bitterness, no curse, only a prayer, that wherever she went after this world, she finally understood what she'd done, and what she hadn't. Helen and I speak every Sunday now. Sometimes it's just a short phone call. Sometimes we meet for tea. She's careful, so am I. We're learning each other in quiet steps, like a dance neither of us was taught. But she holds my hand now. She calls me Mama, and sometimes, when she hugs me goodbye, she lingers just long enough that I can feel the years between us melt a little more. So, no, I didn't win. Not in the way stories usually end, but I chose something better than victory. I chose the truth, and in that truth, I found her again. Not the baby I lost, but the woman she became, brave, kind, and real. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, in the end, to find the ones we lost, and to be brave enough to keep them close. They were laughing again last Sunday, not cruelly, not the way they used to when I stood behind the hallway wall, clutching the frame and wondering if I had become invisible. No, this time, it was different. This time, I was sitting in the living room with them. The television was on, playing one of those shows where people bake elaborate cakes. Emily was curled up beside her daughter, snacking on popcorn, and Helen, she was next to me, her fingers wrapped around mine as if she never wanted to let go again. And they laughed, at something ridiculous, at something sweet, and I laughed too. But my heart still echoed with that old silence, that one moment all those years ago when I stood just outside the doorway, hearing their joy as something foreign, watching it as if it belonged to another world. My family, my blood, my own, and yet not mine. It's strange, isn't it, how a heart can carry both love and grief at the same time, like 2 rivers meeting in the belly of a valley, crashing, mixing, but still flowing forward. I think I've spent most of my life in that valley, walking with feet soaked in both sorrow and hope, and now, finally, I've come to the end of the trail. Not an ending like in books, neat, with bows and triumph, but the kind of ending that simply exhales, a quiet place, a seat at the table, a daughter beside me. I used to ask myself, over and over, where did I go wrong? Was it when I trusted Martha? Was it when I stayed silent too long? Was it when I stopped writing letters? When I gave up sending birthday cards that never got replies? But questions like that are cages. They hold you in the past with no door to the future. I understand that now. The question was never where I went wrong. It was how I would live with it, and the answer is, slowly, softly, one stitch at a time, by daring to believe that even broken hearts deserve to beat freely. The truth I uncovered didn't fix everything. It didn't rewind time or give me back the years I lost watching other families grow while mine disappeared, but it gave me something else. It gave me clarity, it gave me peace, and most of all, it gave me choice, not the kind I was robbed of as a girl, trembling on the edge of motherhood with trembling hands and nowhere to run. No, this choice was mine, earned through ache, paid in silence, forged in the fires of long, lonely nights, and I chose love, not blind, not naive, but the kind of love that sees the truth and embraces it anyway. The kind of love that says, I will not rewrite history, but I will not let it define my future, either. When Helen hugged me last week, her breath close to my ear, she whispered, I'm sorry it took so long. And I told her with tears in my throat and years behind my eyes, it's okay, I would have waited forever, because when you lose a child, even if they're still alive somewhere, breathing air you can't reach, there's a part of you that becomes ghost. You drift. You wonder if they remember the sound of your lullabies, if your face appears in their dreams, if anything you left behind ever whispered to them, she loved you, she never stopped. Now, I know she heard, not with ears, but with something deeper, the blood, maybe, or the soul, because the thread never snapped. It frayed, it tangled, but it held. Sweethearts, if you've walked with me this far, through the tears and the letters and the locked doors and cracked photo albums, then bless your heart. Truly, you've heard the ache of generations, passed from mother to daughter in whispers we weren't allowed to speak aloud. You've held the hand of an old woman who was once just a girl in love with her baby. You've seen how silence can echo, longer than screams. And now, I ask you this, what would you have done if someone took the thing you loved most? If your story was rewritten by someone else's hand? If the world told you to hush, and you listened for decades, would you scream? Would you forgive? Would you chase truth, even if it left scars? I don't have all the answers. I only have this one life wrinkled and weathered and soaked in memory, but I know now, I would do it again. Not the pain, but the fierce love, because she was mine, because I was hers, because no amount of time, no lie, no silence, can unmake that. So, if you're out there, listening, aching, wondering if someone still remembers you, they do. If you're wondering if the truth is worth chasing, it is, even if it comes too late to fix everything, because the truth frees you. And maybe, just maybe, it brings someone back. If you listened to the whole story, my sweethearts, thank you. Tell me in the comments what you would have done, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to live on, because every grandmother has a story, and some of us are just now finding the strength to tell it.